Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's, well, it's really shifted how many of us think about health and weight management. Intermittent fasting, or IF.
And its close cousin, time-restricted eating, TRE.
Exactly. Our mission today, it's pretty straightforward, but really important, we think.
Fair.
We're basically taking that huge stack of research. You've probably seen dense articles, clinical trials, the deep molecular biology stuff, and we're turning it into, let's call it the ultimate knowledge shortcut. We want to get past the headlines,
Beyond the hype.
straight into the science, the real mechanisms, and some of the, frankly, surprising clinical results.
Yeah.
So if you really want to know what the data says about not just what you eat, but maybe even more critically, when you eat, well, this is your map.
And it's an essential deep dive because, let's face it, the popularity of IF and TRE has just exploded. There's so much noise out there. The science we have to sort through, it literally spans millennia of human practice. We're going down to the level of, cellular recycling autophagy and all the way up to cutting-edge chronobiology. That's the study of biological timing.
So we need to step back from just the success stories we hear online.
Precisely. We need to assess the evidence systematically. We're going to rigorously look at the data on weight management, the specific claims about type 2 diabetes, and, really importantly, how these methods might affect things like your muscle mass and cellular health long term.
Okay, absolutely. And the core question, the real tension here seems to be, is restricting when you eat, putting that time structure on your diet, is it as powerful or maybe even more powerful than the old school approach?
You mean just cutting calories every single day?
Yeah, the continuous restriction. And also, are all these different fasting methods, ADF, 5.2, TRE, are they really interchangeable? Or does the specific protocol matter a lot?
That's a key point.
To figure that out, we've got to understand that critical moment, the physiological turning point, the metabolic switch, and how timing, that when factor, plays into actually flipping it.
Okay, so before we get into the studies, we really need to nail down the basics. The terms get mixed up a lot in, popular articles.
Yeah, let's get the definitions clear.
Right. So intermittent fasting, IF, that's the big umbrella term, it basically covers any diet approach that involves recurring fasting periods. And the key threshold is usually 12 hours or longer without food.
12 hours minimum. Got it.
Yeah.
And that's different from just counting calories every day.
Exactly. That's the traditional method. We usually compare it against continuous energy restriction, or CER.
CER.
Okay. That's the cornerstone, really, for managing obesity, insulin resistance. It's what doctors usually recommend.
So CER is that daily grind, right? Monitoring calories, aiming for a deficit, maybe 500 calories less, maybe 1,000 day in, day out.
Yep, that consistent daily deficit. That's the main difference from the sort of feast and famine cycles you see in IF.
And it feels like IF is this new trendy thing, but you mentioned its history is actually quite deep.
Oh, incredibly deep. Fasting hasn't always been about weight loss. It's been a deliberate practice in countless cultures for thousands of years. For medical reasons, religious reasons, spiritual practices.
Wow.
You find accounts in ancient Chinese texts, Greek medicine, Roman practices, recommending periods of abstinence for healing or purification.
It's amazing how these ideas echo through time. I know Benjamin Franklin was apparently a fan of, let's say, strategic restriction.
Yeah.
Didn't he say something about resting and fasting being the best medicines?
He did, yeah. Classic Franklin practicality. But Mark Twain's take, I find it particularly interesting because he wasn't just talking about eating less.
Oh. What did Twain say?
He seemed to distinguish between just, a bland, restricted diet and actual fasting. He talked about total abstention from food for a day or two.
Really? Like a full fast?
Yeah. He suggested, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, that a little starvation can do more for the average sick man than the best medicines and doctors. Even back then, in the late 1800s, he's pointing towards this idea, this underlying concept, that strategic metabolic stress can actually be beneficial.
That's fascinating. And that idea of strategic stress leads us right to the core mechanism, right? The engine behind IF. Researchers call it the metabolic switch.
Exactly, the metabolic switch. If this doesn't happen, you're not really getting the therapeutic effects people talk about with fasting.
So what exactly is the switch? What's flipping?
It's that physiological crossover point. It's when your body fundamentally changes its primary fuel source. Normally, when you're eating regularly, your body runs on glucose.
Sugar, basically, from food or stored carbs.
Right, from your meals directly or from the easily accessible storage form, which is glycogen, mostly stored in your liver.
Okay, and how long did those glycogen stores last if you stop eating completely?
Typically, For most people, after about 12 hours of complete food cessation, those liver glycogen stores get depleted.
12 hours again, that number keeps coming up.
It's the critical mark. That's the moment the switch usually occurs.
Yeah.
Your body can't find easy glucose anymore, so it has to trigger this ancient survival mechanism. It has to switch energy production.
Right, so the quick carb energy is gone. Now the body needs a backup plan, and that means tapping into fat stores.
That's absolutely right. You get this quite radical shift away from using glucose to mobilizing stored body fat. This happens through a process called fatty acid oxidation.
That's the fat-burning mode everyone talks about.
That's the one. And this process, breaking down fats, leads to ketogenesis in the liver. The liver takes these fatty acids and converts them into ketones.
Ketones, and those become the alternative fuel. Things like beta-hydroxybutyrate.
Exactly. Beta-hydroxybutyrate, or beta-OHB is the main one. These ketones can then fuel most organs, including your brain, which actually uses them very efficiently.
So the whole point of IF, structurally, is to force this metabolic switch to happen regularly.
Precisely. It's leveraging this intermittent metabolic switching. Our ancestors, without refrigerators or 247 supermarkets, they would have naturally cycled through this state all the time.
But most of us today, we don't.
Not usually, no. If you think about the standard modern pattern, 3 meals, snacks in between, maybe eating from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
That metabolic switch, it likely never gets flipped. Your blood sugar stays relatively high, insulin stays up, ketones stay suppressed. You remain perpetually in glucose burning mode, and your body doesn't get efficient practice at accessing its own fat stores for energy.
So just based on that 12-hour minimum for the switch, even something like a simple overnight fast, say 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., that's just barely hitting the threshold.
It's the absolute minimum to even start touching that metabolic shift. Anything less than 12 hours is really just dealing with digestion and absorption from your last meal. It's not triggering that deeper therapeutic fasting state.
That's a really critical distinction.
Yeah.
Okay. It makes sense then why we need to look closely at the different fasting protocols, because they're all designed presumably to maximize time past that 12-hour mark.
Yeah.
Okay, so IF is the umbrella. But like you said, the actual methods people use can be really different. They vary a lot in how often you fast and how intense the fast is.
Exactly. And the results can vary quite a bit depending on the specific protocol. So we need to break them down. Generally, they fall into 2 main camps.
Okay.
Those involving actual multi-day calorie restrictions, sometimes quite severe, and those that focus more on just the timing, the eating window.
Let's start with the multi-day restriction ones, which are the main types the research looks at.
The 3 big ones are alternate day fasting, ADF, then a modified version, ADMF, and the 5.2 diet.
ADF, alternate day fasting. That sounds intense. What does it involve?
It's pretty much what it sounds like. Strict alternation. One day you consume 0 calories, a complete water-only fast.
0.
Yep. And then the next day, the feast day, you eat without any specific calorie target. Just eat normally. Or ad libitum, as the studies say.
Okay, that does sound tough to stick to. So I guess that's why they came up with the modified version, ADMF.
Exactly. ADMF, or modified alternate day fasting, is a bit more user-friendly, let's say. On the fast day, you're allowed a small number of calories.
How small?
Typically, it's a very low-calorie amount, defined as less than 25% of your usual energy needs. For most people, that works out to around 500 or 600 kilocalories.
Okay, so not 0, but still very little food on those days.
Right. The idea is that small intake might help people stick with it better, but you still alternate that very low-calorie day with a normal, unrestricted eating day.
Got it. And then the third one, 5.2. That one seems to get a lot of media attention, especially, I think, in the UK.
It does, yeah. The 5.2 diet uses the same low-calorie principle as ADMF, that 500 to 600 kilocal amount, but the frequency is different.
Yeah.
Instead of every other day, you only do the very low-calorie days twice a week. And critically, they should be non-consecutive days.
Okay. So maybe Monday and Thursday you eat very little, and the other 5 days are normal.
Exactly. Habitual eating for the other 5 days. So the key difference is frequency. ADF, ADMF is every other day restriction. 5.2 is just 2 days a week.
Right. That brings us to the other big category you mentioned, the ones focused on timing, not just calories. Time-restricted eating, or TRE.
Yes, TRE, sometimes called TRF for time-restricted feeding in animal studies. Here, the focus shifts completely away from counting calories on any given day. It's all about the clock.
So how does it work?
You basically confine all your daily food intake to a consistent, relatively short window. Maybe 6 hours, maybe 8, maybe 10.
And the rest of the time you fast.
Correct. The most common example you hear about is the 16.8 protocol.
Right, 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating window.
Exactly. Fact for 16, eat within an 8-hour period each day.
And what makes TRE so appealing, I suppose, is that you don't have that mental burden of tracking every calorie.
That's a huge part of its popularity, yes. TRE doesn't explicitly require you to count calories. But what's fascinating is that the evidence consistently shows that just limiting the time available to eat naturally leads to people consuming fewer calories overall.
Really? Without even trying?
Yeah. People just seem to run out of time to eat as much as they might if they were grazing over, say, 14 or 15 hours. Studies often find people naturally drop their intake by somewhere between 200 and 500 kilocalories a day just by sticking to that shorter window.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got these different approaches, ADF, ADMF 5.2, and TRE. How do they stack up against each other, especially for weight loss? That's usually the main goal people have.
You measure them essentially by the average energy deficit they create over time, and as you might expect, the intensity of the protocol matters.
So the tougher ones lead to faster weight loss.
Generally, yes. The studies looking at weight loss efficacy suggest that the most rigorous one, ADF, the true zero-calorie alternating days, tends to produce the most significant average weekly weight reduction. We're talking around 0.75 kilograms per week in some studies.
Wow, 3/4 of a kilo a week is pretty substantial. How does the 5.2 compare to that?
The 5.2 diet, because the restriction is much less frequent, the average weight loss is typically lower, maybe around 0.25 kilograms per week.
Okay, so 0.75 kilograms for ADF versus 0.25 kilograms for 5.2, that difference makes sense. It's directly tied to how much total calorie restriction happens over the week.
Exactly. More fasting days means a bigger overall deficit.
And this seems like the crucial point. Does faster weight loss mean it's actually better if people can't stick with it? What about feasibility?
Feasibility. That is the absolute Achilles heel for the really intense protocols.
Like ADF.
And even ADMF. The sources we looked at are pretty clear. That pattern of eating only 500 or 600 calories every other day, it's likely infeasible for the vast majority of people to maintain long term.
Why? Just too hard.
The constant severe hunger on those restricted days is a major barrier. Dropout rates in ADMF trials can be quite high. People just find it too difficult.
So the 5.2 diet, being less frequent, must be a bit easier then?
It generally is, yes. Because the really tough restriction only happens twice a week, it's considered to have better potential for long-term adherence, especially in a medical setting. But honestly, the clear winner in terms of adherence and sustainability seems to be TRE.
Time-restricted eating. Why does that one come out on top for sticking with it? Is it just the lack of calorie counting?
That's a big part of it. People aren't forced into that meticulous tracking, and they still get to choose the foods they enjoy within their window. That lowers the psychological barrier significantly.
Makes sense.
And the data backs it up. Adherence in TRE trials often remains high, even for studies lasting up to a year. That's a really strong indicator for a lifestyle change. It's often the simplest strategy. Just keep an eye on the clock.
Okay, let's shift gears now from the outside view weight loss, adherence to the inside story. What's actually happening at the molecular level that explains why IF might work? We talked about the metabolic switch creating ketones.
Right.
But you suggested ketones are doing way more than just being backup fuel. They're signaling molecules.
This is where it gets really fascinating, I think. That main ketone body, beta-hydroxybutyrate, beta-OHB, it's not just passive fuel. It actively influences cellular processes.
How so?
Well, in its fuel role, it helps orchestrate a major metabolic shift. It essentially signals the body, okay, stop focusing on energy-intensive building processes like making new fats or cholesterol. Stop storing fat.
Right, stop building, start burning.
Exactly, and instead, direct resources towards mobilizing stored fatty acid oxidation. But crucially, it also sends protective signals.
Protective in what way?
One of the most exciting aspects is that the presence of ketones seems to help preserve muscle mass and function, even when you're losing weight.
Ah, the muscle staring effect. That's often mentioned.
Yes. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. If our ancestors faced famine, the body needed a way to prioritize burning fat reserves while keeping muscle tissue intact for essential activities like hunting or moving. Ketosis seems to be part of that protective mechanism.
That would be a huge advantage over traditional diets where muscle loss can be a real problem.
It's a major theoretical benefit, yes. Although, as we'll discuss later, the human data on muscle preservation with IF is, well, it's a bit complicated.
Okay, we'll definitely circle back to that. But Sticking with ketones as signals, where else are they active? What about the brain? You hear people talk about mental clarity during fasting.
The brain effects are really remarkable, and they're central to many of the claims about cognitive benefits or even longevity. In neurons, ketones like beta-OHB can actually activate specific genes. They influence transcription factors, which are like master switches for gene activity. And one key outcome is the induction of something called BDNF.
BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Can you break that down for us? Sounds important, but technical.
Think of BDNF as like fertilizer for your brain cells. It's a protein that helps nerve cells survive, grow, and form new connections.
Okay, miracle grow for the brain. Got it.
Pretty much. So when ketones boost BDNF, it supports several critical processes. One is mitochondrial biogenesis, basically building more and better power plants inside your neurons.
More energy for brain cells.
Right. Another is synaptic plasticity. That's the physical basis of learning and memory, the ability of brain connections to strengthen or weaken. And overall, higher BDNF is linked to better cognitive performance and resilience against neurodegenerative diseases.
So switching the brain to ketones isn't just giving it a different fuel source. It might actually be triggering maintenance and repair pathways.
That's exactly the idea. And it's why animal studies are so compelling in this area. Research using IF in models of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's has shown it can reduce some of the pathological hallmarks and improve function. It suggests this metabolic switch activates really powerful neuroprotective mechanisms.
That's incredible potential.
Yeah.
Okay, what about the heart? You mentioned some pretty dramatic animal data earlier regarding cardiovascular effects.
Yes, some of that data is really striking. Take, for example, studies where rats were put on an alternate day fasting regimen for several months.
What happened?
They tracked their physiology continuously, and what they saw was this profound gradual decrease in their resting heart rate. We're talking a drop from around 350 beats per minute, which is typical for a rat, down to 250 beats per minute.
Wow. 100 beats per minute difference. That's huge. That's like turning a sedentary animal into an endurance athlete just through diet timing. Is that just because they lost weight?
Researchers think it's more than just weight loss. At the same time, their average blood pressure also dropped significantly from about 120 millimeter Hg down to 90 millimeter Hg.
Also a big drop.
And maybe most interestingly, these ADF animals showed better cardiovascular stress adaptation. When they were put under stress, like being immobilized for a short time, their heart rate and blood pressure didn't spike nearly as much as the control animals.
So IF seemed to make their cardiovascular system more resilient, more stable.
Exactly. It suggests that the fasting pattern itself might be fundamentally reducing the chronic load on the heart and improving its ability to handle challenges. It's acting almost like a non-drug cardiovascular stabilizer in these models.
Absolutely fascinating. Okay, let's move to another deep mechanism often linked with fasting and longevity, autophagy. Cellular housekeeping, right?
Autophagy, yes. Literally means self-eating.
Sounds a bit grim.
Yeah, but it's crucial. It's the cell's internal quality control system. It's how cells break down and recycle damaged proteins, old, worn-out organelles like mitochondria or other unnecessary bits and pieces.
So it cleans house and reuses the parts.
Precisely. And fasting is known to be one of the most potent triggers for autophagy, especially in highly active cells like muscle cells.
What's the switch here?
Yeah.
How does fasting turn on this cleaning process? Is it related to that metabolic switch again?
It is, yeah. It involves a key interplay between nutrient-sensing pathways. When nutrients, especially amino acids and glucose, are plentiful, a pathway called mTOR is active.
mTOR, I've heard of that. It's linked to growth.
Exactly. Think of mTOR as the build and grow signal. It's high when resources are abundant, but when you fast, nutrients become scarce. This activates a different sensor called AMPK.
AMPK, what does that do?
AMPK is basically the cell's fuel gauge. When energy levels drop, AMPK gets activated. It's the conserve energy, find fuel signal.
So AMPK is like the energy saving mode kicking in.
You got it. And when AMPK activates, one of the main things it does is put the brakes on mTOR signaling.
So it shuts down the build and grow signal.
Right. And by inhibiting mTOR, it removes the suppression on autophagy. So low nutrients, high AMPK, low mTOR, high autophagy. That's the simplified pathway. The brake on recycling gets released.
And this recycling process has real clinical implications, for example, in diabetes.
Definitely. The research suggests the cellular cleanup is vital for maintaining metabolic health. In animal models of obesity and type 2 diabetes, effect was shown to improve glucose control, partly by helping to preserve the mass and function of pancreatic beta cells.
The cells that make insulin.
Exactly. And this preservation seemed to happen through this very autophagy lysosomal pathway. Fasting was helping keep the insulin-reducing machinery healthier for longer by clearing out the junk, essentially.
Okay, that connects the dots nicely. We've covered ketones, autophagy. Now let's tie it all together with the clock, the circadian connection. You suggested this is where time-restricted eating might really shine compared to just cutting calories anytime.
Yes, this is a hugely important piece of the puzzle. Our modern lifestyles often lead to what researchers call chronic circadian rhythm disruption, or CRD.
CRD. What causes that?
It's endemic, really. Think shift work, exposure to bright blue light late at night from screens.
Guilty.
And, crucially for our topic, erratic eating patterns. Eating frequently, eating late at night, often processed foods that give confusing signals.
We're basically messing with our internal body clocks all the time.
Pretty much. And this CRD isn't trivial. It actively messes up the timing of molecular processes involved in metabolism. Our organs, liver, pancreas, gut, they have their own internal clocks that expect food at certain times and rest at others.
They're programmed for a rhythm.
Exactly. When we flood the system with calories at the wrong biological time, especially late in the evening, it throws off the timing of gene expression, enzyme activity. Everything gets desynchronized. And this accelerates the development of metabolic diseases like obesity, diabetes, fatty liver disease.
So TRE, time-restricted eating, is essentially an intervention to resynchronize those clocks.
That's the idea. It's framed as a powerful chronobiological tool. And here's the really mind-blowing discovery. The timing of when you eat appears to be the dominant signal, the main Zeitgeber, or time giver, for the circadian clocks in most of your peripheral organs.
Peripheral organs meaning?
Liver, muscle, fat tissue, pancreas, basically everything outside the central brain clock.
Okay. And you're saying the timing of meals is the main cue for these clocks, more important than other cues.
It seems to be the most powerful one for these organs, yes. So powerful, in fact, that the timing of food intake can actually override the signals coming from the brain's master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN.
Wait, the SCN is the one tied to the light-dark cycle, right? The main clock.
Yes. But for metabolic programming in the liver, for example, when you eat, seems to be a stronger signal than whether it's light or dark outside.
That is a massive revelation. It means just shifting your meal times could reprogram your organ function more effectively than changing your light exposure, at least your metabolism.
That's what the evidence strongly suggests. The most famous proof comes from those isocaloric rodent studies. They were groundbreaking.
Isocaloric meaning same calories. Tell me about those.
Okay, researchers took mice and fed them really unhealthy, high-fat, obesogenic diets, stuff designed to make them sick. One group could eat this junk food whenever they wanted, 247, that's ad libitum feeding.
Okay.
The other group got the exact same amount of the same unhealthy food, the same total calories per day, but they could only eat it within an 8-hour window during their active period. That's time-restricted feeding, or TRF.
Same junk food, same calories, just different timing. What happened?
The results were stunning. The mice eating ad libitum got obese, developed fatty liver disease, insulin resistance, inflammation, the whole metabolic syndrome package. But the mice eating the same calories within the 8-hour TRF window, they were largely protected.
Protected from obesity, even on the bad diet.
Largely, yes. They gained much less weight, had healthier livers, better glucose control, less inflammation. It was a dramatic difference, driven purely by the timing of food intake, not the amount or type of food in that comparison.
Okay, let me just pause on that because the implication is huge. Eating the same amount of calories, but within a defined window aligned with their active cycle, kept them metabolically healthier. That seems like definitive proof that when you eat can be as important, or maybe even more important, than what or how much you eat, at least in preventing these diseases in mice.
It's the cornerstone argument for the importance of timing, absolutely. When the animals ate within that restricted window, their internal clocks were synchronized. This led to beneficial changes like reduced activity of fat-producing enzymes in the liver, lower markers of fat synthesis, and increased fat burning, all because the timing signal aligned their metabolism properly.
It really hammers home the idea that every meal isn't just calories and nutrients. It's also a powerful time signal sent to all your major organs, telling them how to run their metabolic programs. Okay, that's compelling animal data. But let's pivot now entirely to humans. We know the standard approach is continuous energy restriction, CER cutting calories daily. How does IF actually stack up against CER when we look at large-scale human trials for weight loss?
Yeah, this is obviously the crucial question for practical application. And the overall consensus, when you look at systematic reviews and meta-analyses pooling data from many studies, is actually pretty consistent.
What's the verdict?
For overall weight loss and reducing BMI in adults who are overweight or have obesity, IF regimens, including things like ADF and the 5.2 diet, are generally found to be as effective as traditional CER.
As effective. Not necessarily better for weight loss overall.
Broadly speaking, they seem to be non-inferior. They produce similar amounts of weight loss when directly compared in many trials.
Okay, so if the weight loss amount is similar, maybe the main advantage of IF is just offering people a different pattern, one they might find easier to stick to than counting calories every single day.
That's a really important takeaway, yes. It gives people options. The studies confirm that IF protocols do successfully create the necessary energy deficit to cause weight loss. For example, one meta-analysis found high-quality evidence that modified alternate-day fasting, ADMF, over 1 or 2 months led to a moderate reduction in BMI compared to just eating normally. It works. It's a viable alternative pathway to achieve that energy deficit.
Got it. Now, moving beyond just weight, what about blood sugar control? Given the global crisis of type 2 diabetes, which is fundamentally about insulin resistance, does IF offer any specific advantages there?
This is where IF, particularly TRE, looks especially promising. Most human studies show that IF consistently leads to decreases in fasting insulin levels.
Which is great if you're insulin resistant.
Exactly. And consequently, it generally improves markers of insulin resistance. The main one measured is USMI-IRR.
HOMI-IR, that's the homeostatic model assessment of insulin resistance. Basically, a measure of how hard your body's working to control blood sugar.
Right. Seeing HOMI-IR go down is a really positive sign that your insulin sensitivity is improving, and IR seems pretty good at achieving that.
Is there evidence comparing IF directly to calorie restrictions specifically in people with type 2 diabetes?
Yes. There is a key randomized control trial about 6 months long that did just that. It took adults with type 2 diabetes and compared an 8-hour TRE strategy against standard daily calorie restriction. And remember, the TRE group wasn't explicitly told to count calories.
Okay, what did they find?
The results were quite striking for weight loss. The TRE group, just by restricting their eating window to 8 hours, lost significantly more weight. They achieved about a -3.6% reduction in body weight on average.
And the calorie counting group?
They lost weight too, but less, about -1.8% reduction compared to controls.
Wow, so double the weight loss in the TRE group just by changing the timing, not necessarily focusing on the calorie number itself. That's impressive.
It is. Now, interestingly, the improvements in HbA1c, that long-term marker of blood sugar control, were similar between the TRE and the calorie restriction groups in that particular study.
Okay.
But the fact that TRE achieved better weight loss, potentially with higher adherence because it's simpler, makes it a really powerful and accessible alternative for managing type 2 diabetes. It might simplify things considerably for patients who struggle with constant calorie tracking.
And are doctors actually starting to consider IF as part of the toolkit alongside standard diabetes medications?
There are signs of that, yes. An interesting trial called EARLY actually randomized patients with type 2 diabetes to either a structured 5.2 diet using meal replacements on the fasting days, or standard care with medications like metformin or an SGLT2 inhibitor called empagliflozin.
So they were comparing the 5.2 diet directly against drugs?
Essentially, yes. It shows that researchers and clinicians are starting to explore IF, particularly the more structured forms like 5.2, as a potentially viable intervention that could be used alongside, or perhaps even as an alternative to, some traditional medical therapies for T2D.
Okay, that's very promising. But now we have to tackle the elephant in the room, or maybe the shrinking muscle in the room, body composition. We heard ketones should theoretically protect muscle, but you hinted the human data is messy. This seems like the biggest potential downside we need to understand.
It absolutely is. This is probably the most critical area where we need more clarity and caution, especially regarding the popular ad libitum TRE where people eat whatever they want within the window.
So what's the general picture versus the concerning findings?
Okay, generally most weight loss from IF is desirable fat loss. The majority comes from reducing fat mass, or FM. That's great.
Good.
However, when you look specifically at lean body mass, or LBM, which is mostly muscle, but also bone, organs, water, the results are mixed. Many reviews conclude that, on average, IF and traditional CER cause similar amounts of LBM loss alongside the fat loss. Usually, you expect maybe 20% to 30% of the total weight loss to be lean mass, which isn't ideal but often considered acceptable during weight loss.
Okay, 20–30% LBM loss is typical for dieting. But there was a study that found something much worse with TRE.
Yes, there was one specific, well-publicized TRE study that reported a really unexpected and, frankly, concerning result regarding LBM loss.
Let's get specific. How bad was it? You mentioned 65% earlier.
That's right. In that particular trial, the group doing time-restricted eating lost, on average, about 1.7 kilograms of total weight. Okay, not a huge amount, but still. The shocking part was that when they measured body composition, about 1.1 kilograms of that loss, which works out to roughly 65% of the total weight lost, was identified as lean mass.
65%. That's drastically higher than the expected 20–30%. That
Yeah.
sounds, well, terrible. That's losing mostly muscle, not fat.
It's a massive red flag. Losing that much LBM is counterproductive for so many reasons. It lowers your metabolic rate, making weight regain easier. It compromises strength and physical function. And it's especially dangerous for older adults or anyone already at risk for sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss.
So why did it happen in that study? If ketosis is supposed to be muscle-sparing, what went wrong? What's the theory?
The leading hypothesis isn't that the fasting itself destroyed muscle. It's more likely related to what, or more accurately, how much protein the participants were eating during their shortened feeding window.
So it's about protein intake.
Exactly. Remember, TRE restricts when you eat, but it usually doesn't dictate what you eat. If you shorten your eating window to, say, 8 hours, you might naturally eat fewer meals.
Makes sense.
And if you're not consciously focusing on getting enough protein within those fewer meals, you could easily fall short of the amount needed to preserve muscle mass, especially when you're also in an energy deficit from eating less overall.
So the problem wasn't the timing restriction itself, but the potential for accidentally undereating protein within that restricted time.
That seems to be the most plausible explanation for that outlier result. It highlights a crucial point. TRE probably needs to be combined with active nutritional guidance, specifically ensuring adequate protein intake. You might need to consciously plan high-protein meals within the window or even consider supplementation to prevent excessive muscle loss.
Okay, that's a really important practical caveat for anyone considering TRE. Don't just watch the clock. Watch your protein, too.
Absolutely essential.
Let's wrap up this section on a more positive note. What about other cardiometabolic markers like cholesterol and blood pressure? Is the news generally good there?
Yes, here the data looks much more consistently positive, and FLY-F generally shows beneficial effects on blood lipid profiles.
Like cholesterol.
Right. Studies consistently report reductions in total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, and also triglycerides, which are fats in the blood. These improvements seem linked to the overall weight reduction achieved.
And blood pressure.
Also positive results there. FF, including protocols like ADF, even in non-obese people, has been associated with reductions in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. So overall, good news for cardiovascular risk factors beyond just glucose control.
We spent a lot of time on the circadian connection from the animal studies, but this section, section 5, feels like the human validation. It suggests that when you choose to place your eating window might be one of the most critical factors in the whole IF equation. We're talking about early versus midday time-restricted eating.
Yes, this comparison is absolutely pivotal. There was a key randomized trial, just 5 weeks long but very well controlled, in healthy, non-obese people. It was designed specifically to isolate the effect of timing.
So comparing two different TRE windows.
Exactly. They wanted to know, does your metabolism handle the same food differently if you eat it earlier versus later in the day, even if the eating window duration and the fasting duration are identical?
Okay, so what were the two windows they tested?
One group did early time-restricted feeding, or ETRF. Their 8-hour eating window was set from 6:00 a.m. to 3:00 p.m.
6 a.m. to 3 p.m. So breakfast, lunch, maybe a very early dinner, then done for the day.
Right. The other group did midday TRE, or MTRF. Their 8-hour window was shifted later, running from 11:00 a.m. to 8:00 p.m.
11 a.m. to 8 p.m. Skipping breakfast, basically. Having lunch and dinner.
Pretty much. Both groups had an 8-hour eating window and therefore a 16-hour fasting period. The only difference was the placement of that window in the day.
Okay, the crucial comparison. What was the main finding regarding metabolic health? Which window was better?
The results were quite clear. ETRF, the early eating window, was significantly more effective than the later MTRF window at improving insulin sensitivity.
Better insulin sensitivity with early eating. How did they measure that?
They used that HOMA-IR score we talked about. The ETRF group showed better glucose clearance. Their bodies handled blood sugar more efficiently and needed less insulin to do it. This strongly suggests that eating in alignment with the body's natural metabolic peak, which tends to be earlier in the day, provides a distinct metabolic advantage.
So our bodies are just better set up to process food in the morning and early afternoon. Were there other benefits specific to the early eating group, the ETRF group?
Yes, the benefits were quite broad, pointing towards a more systemic improvement. Only the ETRF group, not the later MTRF group, showed significant reductions in their fasting blood glucose levels.
Better overnight blood sugar control then.
Seems like it. They also saw better results in terms of body composition. The ETRF group had greater reductions in total body mass, and overall adiposity, specifically percentage body fat and total fat mass, went down more.
So eating later, even within a restricted window, might be less effective for fat loss compared to eating the same amount earlier.
That's what this study suggests, yes. And it didn't stop there. The early eaters also showed significant improvements in markers of inflammation.
Inflammation went down too.
Yes, levels of key inflammatory cytokines like tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF-alpha, and interleukin-8, IL-8, were reduced in the ETRF group, but not the MTRF group. This hints that eating early might help dial down that chronic, low-grade inflammation that drives so many diseases.
That's powerful. And you mentioned even a gut health benefit.
That's right. The study also reported that ETRF, the early window, was associated with an increase in gut microbial diversity. Greater diversity is generally considered a marker of a healthier gut microbiome, which we know is linked to all sorts of health outcomes, including metabolic resilience.
Okay, this seems overwhelmingly in favor of the early window. But the crucial question is why? Both groups ate for 8 hours, fasted for 16. Did the early group just happen to eat fewer calories?
This is the absolute key point that makes the study so impactful. The answer is no.
No difference in calories.
No significant difference. The researchers carefully tracked intake. Both the ETRF and MTRF groups showed similar reductions in their daily calorie consumption compared to the control group who ate over a longer window. But crucially, there was no difference in calorie intake between the ETRF and MTRF groups.
Okay, let me make sure I understand this. Same reduction in calories compared to controls, but the early group got significantly better results for insulin sensitivity, fat loss, inflammation, and gut diversity.
Correct.
So the difference in benefits cannot be explained by one group simply eating less than the other. It has to be the timing itself.
Precisely. This study provides compelling human evidence for that chronobiological effect we discussed. It suggests that maximizing the metabolic benefits of TRE isn't just about how long you fast, but critically, when you place your eating window. Aligning it with the body's natural circadian rhythms, leveraging the time of day when our insulin sensitivity and metabolic machinery are naturally most efficient, typically morning to early afternoon seems to unlock greater advantages than simply applying the same restriction later in the day.
It really suggests our bodies are primed to handle food intake early and then shift into repair and rest modes later. Defying that, even with fasting, seems to leave some benefits on the table. This all sounds incredibly promising, especially the ETRF findings. But, no health strategy is perfect. We need to be realistic and talk about the limitations, the challenges, the safety concerns that come up in the research. What are some of the main hurdles people face when trying IF?
Well, the first one, despite TRE often being flagged as easier to stick to, is still practical adherence, particularly for the more intense protocols.
Like ADF.
Exactly. While the idea of IF might seem simple, just don't eat for a while, the reality can be tough. Some trials report surprisingly high dropout rates.
Can you give an example? How high are we talking?
There was one notable alternate day fasting study where the fasting days were quite restrictive. They reported a 38% dropout rate in the IF group.
38%. That's more than a third of participants quitting. How did that compare to the standard diet group in that study?
The comparison group was doing continuous energy restriction, daily calorie counting. Their dropout rate was lower, at 29%.
So in that trial, at least, the extreme fasting days were actually harder for people to stick with long-term than daily dieting.
It suggests that, yes, the psychological difficulty, the sheer physiological challenge of going with 0 or near 0 calories every other day seems to be a significant barrier for a lot of people.
What are the main complaints? Just hunger?
Hunger is definitely a big one. Participants often report intense hunger, but also things like irritability, difficulty concentrating, headaches, fatigue, especially on those fasting days. It suggests that while the concept is simple, the lived experience of intense fasting really challenges persistence for many. Adherence, especially for ADF and ADMF, needs more study, probably with better behavioral support built in.
Okay, adherence is one issue. What about the evidence base itself? You hear excitement, but also some skepticism from parts of the medical community. Are there weaknesses in the research we have so far?
Yes, that's another important caveat. While the amount of research is growing incredibly fast, the overall evidence base is still relatively young.
How so?
One limitation is that many of the trials are quite short-term. The median follow-up duration in some reviews is often only around 3 months. We don't have a ton of data on the effects of doing IF for years and years.
We need longer studies.
Definitely. And another issue is the quality of evidence for some specific findings. When experts do large meta-analyses, they often grade the evidence quality. And for some of the benefits we've discussed, like maybe specific effects on inflammation or certain lipid markers, the supporting evidence is sometimes classified as low or even very low quality.
What does low quality mean in this context? Risk of bias. Small studies.
It can mean several things. Maybe the studies were small, maybe the methodology had flaws, maybe there was inconsistency between studies, risk of bias in how they were conducted or reported. It basically signals that we need more robust research.
So the takeaway is promising results, but we need bigger, longer, higher quality randomized trials to really confirm these effects and figure out the best ways to implement IF long term.
Exactly. We need more RCTs with standardized protocols comparing different IF types head-to-head with follow-up periods well beyond a year to really solidify the conclusions and develop clear clinical guidelines. Until then, we have to view some findings with appropriate scientific caution.
And let's circle back one more time to that really critical body composition issue, the lean body mass loss.
Yeah.
Even if someone tries to be careful with protein, is this still a major concern?
It remains a significant concern that needs careful management, particularly for vulnerable groups like the elderly or those undergoing cancer treatment, for example.
Yeah.
We just don't have enough long-term data to know the cumulative impact of potentially inadequate protein intake during years of ad libitum TRE.
So future studies really need to track protein intake meticulously.
Absolutely. It's essential that future research rigorously measures and ideally controls for protein consumption to figure out exactly how much protein is needed and how best to consume it within different IF schedules to reliably preserve muscle mass during weight loss.
Okay. Finally, let's talk safety. We know fasting has ancient roots, but historically, wasn't therapeutic fasting sometimes quite dangerous? Are there real risks with modern IF protocols?
Yes. It's important to acknowledge the history. Unsupervised, prolonged, and often extreme therapeutic fasting regimens in the past were linked to some pretty severe adverse effects. Things like electrolyte imbalances causing cardiac arrhythmias, hyperuricemia leading to gout attacks, abnormal liver function, menstrual irregularities, in very extreme cases, even death.
Okay, that's serious. Are the modern protocols like ADF, 5.2, TRE generally safer?
Generally, yes. For healthy adults without underlying conditions, these protocols, when done correctly, are considered relatively safe in the short to medium term. But that history served as a crucial reminder. Fasting puts stress on the body, and it's not appropriate for everyone, and some people absolutely need medical supervision.
Who specifically needs to talk to their doctor before even thinking about trying IF or TRE?
Anyone with significant pre-existing medical conditions should consult their physician. But it's absolutely essential for people with type 1 or type 2 diabetes.
Why diabetes in particular?
Because starting IF or TRE can drastically change their blood sugar levels and therefore their medication needs almost immediately.
Which medications are the biggest concern?
Patients taking insulin are at high risk. Also those on sulfonylureas, which stimulate insulin release, and newer classes like SGLT2 inhibitors or GLP-1 receptor agonists. All of these require careful dose adjustment by a doctor when food intake changes significantly.
Why is that? What's the danger?
The big danger is hypoglycemia, dangerously low blood sugar. If someone is fasting or eating much less, and they take their usual dose of insulin or a sulfonylurea, their blood sugar could crash. It can be a medical emergency.
Okay. And SGLT2 inhibitors, you mentioned ketoacidosis earlier.
Yes, SGLT2 inhibitors work by making you pee out glucose. In the context of fasting or very low-carb intake, they can increase the risk of a specific type of ketoacidosis, even if blood sugar isn't super high. It's called euglycemic ketoacidosis. So again, medical guidance is non-negotiable for patients on these meds.
Got it. Very clear. Lastly, what about the psychological side? We talked about adherence difficulties, but is there a risk of EF triggering or worsening eating disorders?
That is another significant concern raised in the literature. The restrictive nature of fasting, the focus on periods of deliberate food denial, could potentially increase the risk of binge eating episodes afterwards, or potentially exacerbate underlying tendencies towards bulimia or other disordered eating patterns in individuals who are vulnerable.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution from a mental health perspective either.
Definitely not. It highlights the importance of considering the individual's psychological history and relationship with food. For some people, particularly those with a history of eating disorders, AF might be contraindicated.
So the recommendation would be?
For vulnerable individuals, any move towards these kinds of dietary patterns should ideally be done with support, perhaps integrating psychological counseling or cognitive behavioral therapy. The diet needs to fit within a holistic approach that protects mental well-being alongside metabolic health. It's not just about the physiology, #outro. So, if we try to pull all of this together, synthesize this deep dive, the evidence is building quite strongly. Intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating, they really are emerging as potent, effective, non-drug strategies.
Yeah.
They seem to perform comparably to traditional daily calorie counting for weight loss in many people, and they show particular promise, especially TRE, for helping manage type 2 diabetes risk factors and improving markers of cardiometabolic health.
And we've really built, I think, an incredibly nuanced picture now. We've gone from the ancient history down to the molecular details of that metabolic switch, the powered ketones, the different results you might get from 5.2 versus TRE, the crucial need to watch protein for muscle mass, and the importance of autophagy.
But for me, the single most transformative takeaway, the thing that really reframes how we should think about diet, is the undeniable importance of timing.
That ETRF versus MTRF study really hit home.
Exactly. Those head-to-head trials showing that eating earlier in the day, aligning with our natural circadian biology, seems to unlock significantly greater metabolic benefits, better insulin sensitivity, less inflammation. And critically, this was independent of the total calories eaten in that comparison. It sends a powerful message.
The when might be just as or even more important than the what or how much.
It really appears that way, particularly for maximizing metabolic health benefits beyond just weight loss. Aligning food intake with our inherent diurnal rhythms seems paramount.
Okay, this leaves us with a really fascinating, maybe provocative final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. We've established that the timing of when you eat is such a powerful signal for setting your body's internal clocks, maybe even stronger than light itself for some organs.
Right.
So if when we eat has this profound impact, what other common everyday habits in our modern lives, things that constantly disrupt our internal rhythms beyond just meal timing, what else might be secretly sabotaging our metabolic health without us even realizing it?
That's a great question to ponder. Think about the cumulative effect of what some call the erratic lifestyle of modern society. Irregular sleep schedules, maybe going to bed and waking up at wildly different times on weekdays versus weekends.
Yeah, social jet lag.
Constant exposure to artificial light, especially blue light from screens late into the night. Highly variable meal times day to day, not just late eating, but inconsistent eating. If regulating when our body interacts with metabolic inputs, food being the main one we discussed, is as powerful as the evidence suggests, then maybe our ongoing struggle with obesity, diabetes, and other chronic diseases isn't just a fight against calories or carbs or fat. Maybe it's also fundamentally a battle against the chronic disruption of our own internal, evolutionarily ancient timing system. Exploring the when of all our metabolic inputs, not just food, might just be the beginning of a real revolution in personalized health and medicine.
A battle against the clock, in a way. That is the perfect thought to wrap up this deep dive. Thank you so much for exploring the science of time and metabolism with us.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.